Hello, everyone. Good evening, good night, good morning, good day, depending on what side of the planet you're on right now. I am not Kevin Brewer. I am Cale Royer from treestuff.com. Kevin will be on here in a second, but part of our agreement here when we do these webinars is that I actually get to be the one talking and on camera for once, instead of just Nick or Lindsay or Kevin or Nick or Rhea or whoever it is. So this is my time to shine. So you have to listen to me. So, couple things that we have coming up here, and one really big thing that we have coming up really soon. Uh, we have our Treetopia Light, our Treetopia Tour Edition, coming up on July 19th. That is the first of two events that we have. Uh, that is going to be in Flemington, New Jersey. So if you're in the area, this is the first time that Tree Stuff has done an East Coast arborist event. So if you've never been to a Tree Stuff or A Plus event, we like to put on a show and have a bunch of fun. Uh, we have 5 different arborist games that are very unique. You will not find them anywhere else. It's action packed, a lot of fun. They're free to do once you do the ticket. The ticket gets you in. I believe right now it's $27. Ticket gets you in. You can do all the games. You can do all of the free classes that are there as well. Those classes are going to give you CEUs when you take them. And if you want to, if you're so inclined, then you can do the games, do all of the games, and we'll total up your score of how well you did out of the top 20 people for each of those games. And the person who does the best is going to get a free, all expense paid trip to next year's Arborfest in April. So that's pretty cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a neat kind of competition because some people are going to be really good at the throw line challenge. Some people are going to be really good at just the speed climb. We have a competitive version of the human claw game, which is going to be a lot of fun. Um, so come on out, do it for fun. Maybe you'll end up being really good at a couple of things and you'll beat everybody else. And then, after all that fun and with the classes as well, there's going to be an after party at the New Jersey Crane new headquarters, which I haven't been to. I'm excited to see it. Heard it's really nice. Where there's going to be a footlocking competition sponsored by Samson. There's going to be $3,000 in prizes. The top 20 people who qualify are all going to get cash. And then, and we're just going to party and have fun. So, and we like to put on a big party, laser lights and bands and all that. That's kind of our partner A Plus is in on that. We always do parties together with them whenever we're at trade shows, Treetopia, things like that. And now our other new partner that we have with Noble Oak Safety and Training, which is Jordan and Hans Thielman. We have been big fans of theirs and friends with them for a very, very long time. They're also absolutely ridiculous people. So we've got a whole big event that we're all kind of chipping in and coming up with crazy ideas. So it's going to be a whole bunch of fun. New Jersey, July 19th. Come on out to that. That's treetopiausa.com. Or you can go to treestuff.com and there's like a video graphic there that you can click on and it will take you to that website. Just want to make sure everybody knows also those pictures on like the front page, I spend a lot of time on them. You can click those. You click those and it takes you to something. So do that. So that's the big one is Treetopia coming up July 19th. Kentucky Tree Stuff Party August 9th. If you're in the area, it's a smaller customer arborist hosted party powered by Tree Stuff. A lot of fun. That one is, I think, the 3rd year that we have done that in Kentucky with Chad Strand. Might be 4th year. He puts on a whole bunch of fun. They do the I don't know. It's like the human target contest or something. You swing out of a tree and you bomb down and try to land it into a trash can. Everybody has a whole bunch of fun doing that. After that, in September 23rd, is the California version of the Treetopia Tour. So that's going to be same thing, just on the other side of the country. Tree stuff, A plus tree, noble oak, safety and training, big party, lots of CEUs, games. Oh, by the way, Treetopia, very kid friendly. Kids 12 and under are free. We have like a little kids climbing zone. Kids can do all the games if they're big enough to fit in the harnesses, and it's just a bunch of fun. I've got 2 sets of kids stickers as well that I'm excited to give some kids because I think they're really fun and really silly. One of them is a guy in a monster truck that's jumping over the tree stuff logo, and the monster truck is like a chainsaw monster truck. That was inspired by my 4-year-old. But so a lot of fun for everybody. September 23rd is in California. If you're on that side of the country, please go to that one. If you're feeling like traveling, go ahead and come to both. We are also still working with Sam Sadoff, nailing down a better date. We did have to postpone the last one we had to postpone the last webinar from him, and we will get him in here pretty soon to do his webinar on profit leaks and pricing traps, and actually the parts of a business that you don't think about, the kind of the like unfun parts of a business, because it's not actually chopping things with a chainsaw. So without any further ado, I know that was a bunch of ado, but I'm going to turn it now over to our friend Kevin Brewer from Arborjet. He's going to talk a little bit about all the things that you can do with plant health care, how you can incorporate that into your business, and how you can make some extra money on that. Actually, a little bit more ado. Sorry, Kevin, you've been so patient. Last bit of ado, the CEUs for this webinar. You can get 2 CEUs for completing the webinar within the next 24 hours. Sorry, for completing the quiz at the end of the webinar in the next 24 hours. So I will post a link in the comment section and in the video description of wherever you're watching it. You take that quiz. If you get 16 out of 20 correct, then you will get 2 CEUs as long as you did it within the next 24 hours. After that, you can still take it at any time. You can take it 4 years from now, whenever. It will be worth 1 CEU. We also have our whole backlog of webinars on YouTube that you can go watch. You can take the quizzes on those and still get a CEU from that. Just make sure, please, that you put your ISA number in correctly. If you don't put it in correctly, I can't really do anything for you until you find out that it's not showing up. So, that being said, I don't think there's any more ado. So I'm going to send it on over to Kevin. Please take it away.
I thank you, Cale. We're going to be talking about plant healthcare today, all different aspects of it. Hopefully it's going to be a little bit from, some more advanced stuff, some beginner things, but hopefully we can all take something away. It's going to be focused on, doing plant healthcare efficiently, ethically, and with profitably. So we'll get started right out of the gate here. First, I'll let you know a little bit just about Arborjet, Ecologel, and myself, just so who you're hearing from. So Arborjet was established in 2000, and it's a privately held company. So we still completely control, all our own direction, our hopes and dreams, our R&D. We have a lot of fun doing that. We acquired the majority interest in Ecologel Solutions in 2018, and the remaining interest in 2025. And that's where a lot of our soil health products started getting integrated into our plant healthcare programs. And then we support a broad range of professional markets, from arboriculture, landscapers, lawn care. We even sell some of supersonic air knives since we acquired that company in 2022. We even worked with search and rescue companies, fire departments, with that air excavation equipment. We design, develop, and manufacture all of our own products. And we're committed to environmental responsibility. So we have programs like Saving America's Iconic Trees, where we go out and people can nominate just important or iconic trees in their neighborhoods, or trees with public access that have good stories, and we just donate the plant healthcare there. We team up with local tree companies. So if anybody has some really cool trees they'd like to nominate, that our website has the Saving America's Iconic Trees program. And we have highly engineered products to cover the landscape from soil to crown. So, it's a full plant healthcare company. We try to make unique solutions to complex problems or existing problems. We try to make the treatments more efficient and more effective. So about myself, I've been in the green industry for a little over 20 years now. It's hard to imagine when I say that. I started off dragon brush and then, went to tree climbing after that. So I've done pretty much everything in the industry from, driving bobcats, log trucks, climbing, plant healthcare sales and management. And I've been with Arborjet now for 8 years, coming up next month. I've been a certified arborist since 2013, an ISA board certified master arborist since 2018, and recently an ASCA registered consulting arborist in 2020. And then I have my tree and plant appraisal qualifications and tree risk assessment qualification. So I'm always out there trying to take the new classes, always trying to educate myself, stay up on the newest trends, the newest problems. I believe education is key to all levels of this industry, from beginner to as long as you've been in it, there's always still more to learn. So with plant healthcare, I like to start with integrated pest management. That's the most accepted practice in plant healthcare, to kind of looking at the whole picture of plant health issues and making a dynamic plan that can be fluid and change throughout seasons and years over years. A lot of applications, sometimes you may see a tree that has a health issue one year, you may have to treat it for mites, but you don't need to spray that tree every year for mites for the rest of its life, most likely. So, we want to integrate, monitoring into those programs, and whole landscape strategies. So IPM is a science-based approach of managing pests using information about life cycles, pests and their interactions with the environment. And we do that through biological controls. We have beneficial insects that we'll discuss a little bit more about later. Habitat manipulation. What that is physically changing out plants. If you have a monoculture of things, removing some of those trees, planting a more diverse landscape, bringing in more flowers to attract those beneficial insects and make a more diverse ecological community. You'll have much healthier plants. Cultural practices, cleaning up diseased plant material, especially some things like tar spot on maples. It's a leaf disease that affects maples, and they drop the leaves and the spores come back up the next year. So just raking up all those infected leaves is a great cultural practice to keep that disease at a minimum. Choosing resistant varieties, so always keeping up on the new cultivars that are out there. They have some great crab apples out there now that are resistant to scab and rust. They have red maples that are resistant to codominant stems. That's another big plant healthcare issue, is just the genetic predisposition of some varieties to self-destruct. And then we do, pesticides as part of plant healthcare, and kind of finding those thresholds for when we have to react with a pesticide to kind of knock down a population, and then monitor it on the way back up to try to get those beneficials back in. Pesticides is typically reserved for, the serious cases and kind of when you have to kind of start things over, but you don't want to overuse pesticides, or you can knock off the balance of nature and start creating more problems than you have. So we'll talk about application methods of pesticides and how to choose the correct ones, and what kind of choices to make in those medicinaments that'll have the least impact on the surrounding area. So first, what is a healthy tree? What are we trying to get in the landscape? And we were trying to get trees that are tolerant of insect and disease pressure. Plant healthcare is not about getting trees free of insect and disease pressure. It's about making them tolerant to an acceptable level of insect and disease pressure. They're caterpillars, lacebug, they're all just a natural part of life out there. They have their place. The beneficial insects feed on them. So again, there has to be some pressure. We just want trees that are tolerant of the pressure that's there. We want them to have the ability to withstand abiotic stresses. And abiotic stresses would be probably the most common one as we get is flooding or drought. And drought can cause quite a bit of stress to trees, but we want them to be able to have enough water reserves, enough energy reserves to be able to deal with those seasonal fluctuations and abiotic stresses without causing them to go down a disease spiral or go into a death spiral. They need to have proper physiological functioning. So you want to make sure they don't have any girdling roots, anything wrapping around the trunk that could girdle the trunk, rubbing branches. You want to make sure that they have a great connection between the ground and the roots and nothing interfering with that. And that's what boring insects can interrupt, is that physiological functioning. a full dense canopy. So they need to have photosynthetic potential. They need that sun to drive their, their factories. That's how they make their energy is the sun. So they need a full dense canopy. So if you get canopy thinning from, caterpillar defoliation or over pruning, you don't have that. And that can bring down the health of a tree over time. And then we want abundant carbohydrate storages. So that goes back to having, that healthy physiological function in a full dense canopy where they can put away energy for harder times later on down the road. Trees can, hold on to a tremendous amount of carbohydrates and store those to go through years of stress and be able to bounce back. You see this with spongy moth. They can get completely defoliated. Trees in the forest that are healthy with high carbohydrate storages, they refoliate fine and they can handle that 2-3 times and still bounce back, where a tree in the front yard that has compacted soils is a little struggling. That defoliation can send them into decline and death within a season or two. So they need that carbohydrate storage to get through those hard times. So what causes these spirals in tree health a lot of the times is we have Mannion's disease spiral, which has these predisposing factors, which can be drought, inadequate cultural practices, soil compaction, things of that. And then that's what kind of starts the tree going down a path. And these are the ones where you want to intervene soon when you can. With drought issues, we'll talk about proper mulching and soil health later on to control, drought stress. But then when you get those, they can get secondary issues, opportunistic pathogens. Boring insects can start being attracted to them as they get a little stressed out. And then you start getting closer to that dead tree. So you want to intervene before they get too far down that spiral. So an example of a tree going down kind of that disease spiral would be Leyland cypress that has flagging symptoms and is going downhill from Ceridium canker. So Leyland cypress can already be a little bit shallow rooted, but predisposing factor, if you have shallow soils, they're going to be much more prone to any drought stress. So then you get that inciting factor, which would be the drought stress from a shallow rooted tree. And then you get Ceridium canker and you get these dying back areas. And on a lot of evergreens, when you get that heavy dying back, it takes a long time for them to fill back in again. Deciduous trees have a lot more adventitious buds. Some conifers don't have adventitious buds at all to grow back when they get those hollow areas to fill back in. So here, just this plant would be a good option to make sure that you had proper mulching. We'll talk about moisture management options later on to avoid that inciting factor of drought stress that causes it to go down that spiral and get Ceridium canker. So trying to intervene earlier is much easier than trying to deal with these harder to control diseases or insect problems like boring insects that are attracted to stressed out trees. So beneficial insects, these are ones we want to keep in mind. This is all the balance of how we make those decisions on whether it's time to interact on a disease cycle with a pesticide or just see if nature is going to balance out. So we want to know what these beneficial insects look like. And predatory mites are great for controlling mite populations and keeping them at low populations. And you can see these ones in the difference with the hand lens. They're going to be quite fast compared to spider mites that are, have the chlorophyll in them. And you can do, wipe testing. They're also going to have much longer legs because they're a predator. They're attacking other insects to feed on them. And many feed on all stages, the egg, nymph, and adult stages of mites. But again, if you have a really high population of spider mite and not a lot of predatory mites, that's sometimes when you have to, intervene, do an application with a miticide, get the populations down, then they'll rebuild in a healthy balance. Green lacewing is another fantastic beneficial insect. They feed on aphids, thrips, whiteflies, leafhoppers. The adult stage feed on nectar, pollen, and honeydew, though. So to attract green lacewing to a property, you have to have both, aphids, a feed for the larvae, but you have to have the flowering plants and shrubs to attract the adults. So having flowering plants on a landscape and, a good diverse selection of flowering plants that start from, spring through fall in the northern climates, and in southern climates, just, something that's going to flower year round, different plants in that diversity, you'll start to attract a lot more beneficial insects because there's more than just the green lacewing, where as adults, they need nectar and pollen, but as larvae, that's when they're a beneficial insect eating things like aphids and the such. So, that's another one where if you do those blanket sprays of pesticides that were done in the past and you kill every aphid, every thrip, every whitefly and sterilize a property, you're never going to get the beneficials back until you have a problem again. Um, so you don't want to always do a hard reset, which we'll talk about. And that's about how we choose application methods and products to have as little of an impact on overall pest populations and just intolerable pest populations that we want to control. And these feed for 2 to 3 weeks before they become adults and have another generation. So they're a pretty fun little beneficial insect. And when you attract these to the property and find them, it means you're doing a great job of having that diverse landscape. You've got a good design, and nature's really working for you. Assassin bugs, these are when you can actually purchase also to introduce into a landscape. But these ones are great because they're beneficial in all life stages. They're predatory, so as larvae and adults, and they're a little bit larger, so they can feed on caterpillars, small caterpillars, leafhoppers, mealybugs. They're very active in high temperatures and low humidities. They're a pretty hardy insect. They have a high reproduction rate, and they are just a general predator of problem insects. They'll kill beyond only what they need, and that's why they got the nickname the assassin bug. Is they'll keep killing leafhoppers and aphids, and just reducing that pest population in the landscape even past what they can just consume. So they're a good one you can introduce into a property if you have a high population of varying insects, but you want to reduce those pesticides. So bring something like this in to help try to get a little natural balance a little quicker out of the gate. Most of the time, what we see, though, the biggest issue that's a predisposing factor is just urban soils in the landscape. They're just lacking in so much of what trees want. They're just not what nature intended, and they can't be. It takes thousands of years for soils to build themselves. So first, what a healthy soil is and what we're looking for, what you would define that as the strong soil structure that should hold together wet or dry. If you go into the forest when even there's drought conditions, move some of the leaf litter around and pick up the soil, it's not dust in your hand. When you have urban soils, you'll see when it gets dry, you can put your fingers into it. It's almost sandy, dusty, especially next to driveways and sidewalks. There's not enough organic matter there to hold that soil together. So you want a good, strong structure. It needs to allow water infiltration. So it has to have, small pores that can retain water, but you don't want a hydrophobic soil that you can get with even compacted and overexposed mulches. So you want rain to soak in and not erode the soils. You need abundant, diverse biological communities. And you get those through diverse plantings. Different trees interact with nature differently. Legumes like honey locust have beneficial bacteria that help make nitrogen available to them, where other deciduous trees like maples have mycorrhizae and fungi that helps make nitrogen and other minerals available to them. So kind of having those diverse plantings, you get those diverse biological communities. But healthy soils require both adequate cover from dead and living plant material. So this is one that I like to bring up because you see a lot of properties where they put in these big mulch beds and they cover it with that dead plant material that's going to decompose, it's going to break down, it's going to add organic matter to the soil. But you need to have that living plant material there also, to have that symbiotic relationship to promote mycorrhizae, to promote fungi, to feed the soil with carbohydrates, not just dead plant material for organic matter. So you need both dead and living material. Lawns, we have a lot of living material, but when they bag the clippings, we have no dead material. So you always want to leave some over clippings behind in perennial beds, or you'll never really build a healthy soil if you remove all plant material at the end of the season in your cleanups. And then they have to efficiently release nutrients essential for plants as well as keep them near the surface. So if soils are too sandy, it can just cause a lot of leaching and you can't keep any nutrients high in the soil profile. But what we often see in urban soils is compaction, which doesn't allow for those small pore spaces for water to kind of hide out and stay in the soil profile and make itself available for the long term. They lack organic matter. They have insufficient cover from the elements, so even rain can compact soils when they don't have either mulch overhead or plants overhead, leaves overhead to kind of slow down the speed of those raindrops. So yeah, even water and irrigation can compact soil over time. They lack diverse biological activity. They're highly disturbed, so you don't have a good freestanding soil composition. It's often mixed with other soil horizons, a lot of clay, a lot of sand, not a lot of organic matter, and they lack the ability to exchange and hold nutrients with plants. And the effects that these poor soils can have on the health of trees over time is they reduce the growth potential of the plant. So you've got soil issues if you've got a tree that, if you've got a red oak, a healthy young red oak should be, those will put on 12 to 18 inches of growth per year. Where in poor soils, you'll see they'll get down in a year, they may be only putting on 2 or 3 inches of growth. In poor soils, compacted roots, poor planting techniques can all cause those same symptoms, but poor soil most commonly. And then reduced ability to produce photosynthate. So with that reduced growth, they often have chlorotic leaves. They're a little less healthy, a little more pest issue. That pest pressure is quite heightened on stress trees, so you get a lot more scale insects. And in the urban environment also, with less predatory insects and diverse plantings and just nature, scale populations are also much higher. I've seen, in the Northeast, we can have explosions of Lacanium scale on a host of plants. But you walk 100 yards into the forest and the oak trees don't have Lacanium scale on them. It's typically a very urban issue. And that's just due to heat, low carbohydrate storages in the plants to build self-defense compounds, and higher temperatures. They have much more drought susceptibility due to that lacking organic matter and a lot more sun on the soil. And you'll get tip dieback on the plants as well. So you start to see a little wilting, little tip dieback. The tree just can't sustain itself in all its manner. It doesn't have enough energy to do what it needs to do to grow and sustain. Trees need to grow year over year to be able to transport nutrients from the soil. As they put on those growth rings, some trees, they're only active for 1 to 5 years of sapwood on some species. So they need another healthy year of sapwood before another one turns into heartwood to be able to transport water and nutrients. So as they struggle in that growth gets more condensed and compressed, they just don't have a healthy enough vascular structure to support the tree in the future. So you need, they need to grow to their genetic potential for their full health. Then you get decline and death. So some ways that we can work with these urban soils with existing trees without doing root damage is with the supersonic air knife. So this is a great piece of equipment for working around trees. It uses air at Mach 1.7. So it creates actually a sonic boom coming out of the end of the device that helps break up compacted soils, but doesn't harm any of the roots, underground utilities. I think it's a lot of fun. It can be, a big mess, but as somebody who's always interested in trees and seeing the mystery of them, kind of blowing that dirt away and seeing the underground portion of trees, I find very fascinating. And I think it's the perfect intersection of tree work and plant healthcare. You don't need a plant healthcare license or a pesticide license to use the supersonic air knife and work with soil health as far as adding organic matter, working in compost, things like that. You can do a lot of benefit to plants without even the use of pesticides or those licenses. So a lot of different ways we can use the air knife in plant healthcare is, we'll go into these a little more detail, but vertical mulching, radial trenching, soil rejuvenation, root crown inspections. I love bare root transplanting for trees of whatever size you can handle with the equipment you have. I've seen trees up to 18-inch diameter bare root transplanted with cranes in areas where they just couldn't move enough soil because there wasn't access for that heavy of equipment. And they've done quite well. But in smaller plant material, 2 to 3 inch diameter trees, shrubs, up to 5-inch diameter trees, often you can get much more root material bare root transplanting than you would with traditional digging. Pre-construction inspections, and anytime you're working your underground utilities, it's a great option. So there's several different versions of it. There's the LT standard. That's the most common that we use in our industry. But then there's also a high flow version that runs off a 375 CFM compressor. It's going to move dirt much faster. It's going to trench much quicker. So if you're doing irrigation near trees or bare root transplanting, the high flow can be quite the time saver. The liquid has an attachment for a hose to be used with it as well. So you can inject water into the airstream. That helps keep dust down. It also helps keep a little water on the roots. But there's a time and a place for every one of them. But again, that LT standard is the most common. And then we have the LT vacuum, which we've got a picture of a redesigned version a little later on, where if you are removing soil near the trees, after you loosen it up, you want to be able to get that soil away without harming the roots by using like a shovel to try to adjust the grade after you took all that care to loosen it up. You can take it out, amend the soil, then put it back in with that. So the LT, this is the one, again, the most common, has a very ergonomic trigger assembly versus other air excavation equipment. I've used quite a few, but this one, it's been designed with the trigger on the top. So you're pushing down on something that's pushing back on you, which makes it much easier on your elbow and shoulder versus equipment that might have a gas pump style handle where you're pulling up on something, pushing up. That ergonomic trigger really helps when you have to use these things all day. Has a nice large pressure gauge on the back of it. And that's mostly to tell you, when you've got your compressor and you've got a couple hoses, you start putting them together. If you get too far away from the compressor, when you pull the trigger, you're going to see that pressure gauge drop down below 90 PSI. And that's when it's time to advance that compressor, get a little closer to the working area to stay efficient. It's all lightweight anodized aluminum barrels. So, it's heavy duty, but it's also lightweight. So again, not too wearing on you, but the stainless steel nozzle and wear tip is on there. So you don't get that wear and tear on it when you're going through rocky or sandy areas. And it has a tip that can be replaced, but that steel nozzle lasts quite a long time. They last years and years and years. It's kind of a buy it once, last it for life. And there's very few seals in it, so they're also pretty easy to rebuild if you had to get into the body of them. So vertical mulching is the first thing we'll talk about, and it's extremely beneficial for the input. And this is where we would do a 3 foot by 3 foot grid under more mature trees and go up to 3 feet deep. So we take the air knife, move that adjustable handle on the barrel all the way to the top, put it straight to the ground, pull the trigger, and just bore it straight in. And this works really well if you have large areas or customers with limited budgets, to have a quick way to get through a bigger job but make a serious impact that is going to be beneficial. And then we're backfilling those vertical mulch holes with amended soils, with native soil. You can add some biochar, some compost. We have Nutriroot granular you can add in there. And then it's going to help decompact all the soil around those areas. So even though you're only doing maybe a 3-4 inch diameter hole, over the next couple of seasons, it'll help decompact the soil a foot or two out in every direction. So eventually you've impacted the whole area under the tree. And this can be done with trees and lawn. When you have homeowners that don't want you to do large mulch beds, you can get away with doing this in the lawn without doing a lot of damage to it or invasiveness. You'll have those 3-inch bare spots, but they'll fill back in. But we can amend soils and trees without disrupting too much turf efficiently in large areas. And one of my tips, I've done quite a bit of this, is use an old construction cone, cut the tip off of it a little bit, and you can run the air knife right through the middle of that, so it helps keep everything from flying away too much. But then just flip the cone right upside down and use it as a funnel to refill those vertical mulch holes after you're done. Kind of the step up from vertical mulching, if you have a more important tree of significance, if you have customers with a little better budget, if the tree's in decline and you have to move a little bit faster and you need to amend the soil a little bit quicker, it's a spoken wheel design. So you'll see on this tree on the right, pretty much, on smaller trees, you'll do 6 to 8 radial trenches. On larger trees, once you get about 15 feet out and those trenches are, say, 7-8 feet apart, you'd start another trench in the middle. So you might have 6 or 8 at the beginning of the project, but 30 feet out from the tree, if you have a very large tree and you have a large area you're working, you may have 40 trenches by the outside. So just, start a new one as they get too far away. And you can combine these with vertical mulching also. You can do the trenches 6 to 8 inches wide, 8 to 12 inches deep, and do the 3x3 grid pattern to go down 3 feet deep to get those boreholes. And then mix in the amendments and the compost. One of the nice things about the radial trenching is you don't have to remove the soil like we did in this picture on the right. You can loosen it all up and then top dress it with the 1 inch, then go back with the air equipment and just stir it back in and mix it right in like you're baking a cake and mixing. You just pull the trigger, get the nozzle under the ground, and you'll work all that into the amended soil without having to take it out if you don't have to replace the soil or amend it completely. And it works for large and small trees. And you can do it in stages to fit budgets. As we went out, like with those radial trenches, if it's a limited budget, but you're doing this, you don't have to add the new ones in between. You could come back the next season and then do a couple more trenches, and it's still going to be beneficial over time. And it does decompact the soil a foot or two out from all those trenches. But this is also good if you have drainage issues. If you have soil that's, these trees, this one was having issues with compacted soil that had poor drainage. So for a tree, it had a very shallow root system. There wasn't a lot of oxygen available due to the compacted soil. So we gave the trenches out, and then these trees were only growing 2-3 inches a year. And for oak, that's pretty restricted. And a couple of years later, we came back and they were putting on 6-8 inches of new growth again. And that was just by amending the soils. They weren't on a fertilizer program. It was just trying to alleviate that compaction, get a little organic matter in there, and giving these trees a little healthier spot to grow. And then we also saw a big reduction in the pest pressure that was on those trees over time. So soil rejuvenation, this is where you would kind of work with the whole area under the crown of the tree or to rejuvenate soil before new planting. And this is where you would go 8 to 12 inches deep and just kind of loosen up all the soil, top dress the entire area, and then work that compost and biochar and soil amendments into the soil. And this is good at time of new plantings to address a larger area. You can do it around existing plants. But this is kind of the all-in for trees that need help pretty quickly. They've been in decline for a while, and you need to make sure you get good nutrients to them. You want to water after you do this if you're doing it during the growing season. It's best to do early spring or fall before the trees are actively growing. But then if you have to do it later in the season, again, just make sure you have good soil moisture after that. And this is kind of an example of that kind of mulch desert here, where you can work in some new plantings in there, get some more diversity in there that'll also help with the health of the plant. But while you're doing it, if you have these existing trees and you want to do underplantings, rather than just trying to take a shovel and dig a planting hole, use the air excavation equipment to dig that hole, so you're not cutting any roots on the tree you're trying to save. So we can bare root plant, even if we have containerized stock, we can blow the soil off of that, dig a little planting hole, then have that new shrub or tree planted in the native soil, so we don't have any interface issues with different kind of soil composition. And you're not doing any root damage to the existing plants, and they'll all establish quite quickly. And again, you can combine this with the vertical mulching also for better and longer term effect. So root crown inspections, we see this a lot with trees planted that were containerized. They get a lot of girdling roots, trees that are planted too deep. So we can blow away all that soil around the base of the tree to kind of get an idea of what we're working with. This is a pretty extreme case on a maples, zelkovas, elms. I see those kind of being the most extreme sometimes. And you don't want to go after every single girdling root in one season. You can cut too many, even though they're causing harm in the long run. They are supplying water and nutrients to the plant. So you can't cut them all. So I don't recommend cutting more than 25% of the trunk area on any one given season. So go in there and cut the most serious offenders one year. Consider using a growth regulator, which we'll talk more about later, to help the tree rebound a little bit more from that root damage. Even though you're helping the plant, cutting roots does restrict their ability to get water and nutrients. And then keep an eye on the tree for a year or two, see how that growth's going. If it didn't get stunted too much, the tree's responding well to that root pruning, then you can go back, excavate again, and take out a few more girdling roots. And it might take 3 or 4 visits over 8 years on really bad cases, but you can get in there and get them straightened out, as long as the tree's not in too far decline to begin with. Just doing a few at a time. And again, think of that tree, if you cut it down, look at it as basically just a pie shape, then take a quarter of that volume and look at the cut ends of the roots. And you don't want to fill that area with the cut ends of the roots more than a quarter of the trunk area. Or that's about when you can put a healthy tree even in decline just from root pruning. And don't cut major roots that could be structural. It's just the girdling ones you want to go after. Invasive plant removal is another great opportunity for the air knife. When you have a lot of invasive plants around trees, if you have a lot of bittersweet growing into trees, if you're doing a soil rejuvenation, you might as well chase down the roots on some of those invasive plants and get those removed completely, because bittersweet is one that'll keep growing back if you leave any root material in there. This is porcelain vine on the right, and this can be quite aggressive, but the best way to control porcelain vine is to find those nodules underground, make clean cuts on the roots, and then paint herbicide on the roots to make sure it doesn't come back from other areas. But if you try to dig out those nodules with a shovel, it makes a very rough cut and can compromise the vascular structure of it. So if you were to paint it with herbicides after digging it out with a shovel, it wouldn't be as effective. So making a nice clean area pit to dig out porcelain vine is very effective with the air excavation. The only one it's not so much effective with is knotweed. That one, even with soil excavation, any plant material left behind from knotweed will come back. But it's great for chasing down bittersweet. If you have wisteria taken over, porcelain vine, it's a great way to remove invasives while also working with compacted soils. And you get these a lot in urban environments on areas that have been given up on for a little too long. If you're trying to bring a landscape back from a little bit of neglect, it's a great way to rework the area without harming the existing trees you want to save. And then pre-construction inspections. We can, quite often we have to, in smaller lots, may have to build, sheds or garages near existing trees. And we can do those on helical piers rather than slabs. So it's very little effect on the soil near the trees. But even if we're going to put in those helical piers, which may only be 10-inch diameter to put up a 10 by 20 shed, you might need 6 of them. You want to excavate down and make sure that 10-inch area is not going to hit a major root for the tree. Even 6-7 feet out from a mature tree, you can quite often find a 10-inch area hole where you can put one of those helical piers without doing any damage to massive root structure. You can prune a 1 or 2 inch root on a large mature tree and not do much damage to it. But you want to make sure you excavate out and find the most advantageous areas if you're doing construction near trees to be minimally invasive to the tree. And you can do it early in the planning to work with the architects and the designers, and they can give you some leeway. I've done some projects on this, and they're pretty helpful in how big of an area you need to excavate to find those spots. But good way to do construction near trees, so you can keep a happy plant, and have that urban development that is unfortunately required around these plants as we expand. So irrigation and lighting. If you're doing irrigation near trees, doing trenching, as soon as you get into that root zone of the tree, especially the critical root zone, you want to excavate, with an air knife to be able to pass those utilities under the roots rather than damage them. And you'll have, especially if you're putting in, ground lighting, they're trying to, highlight their landscape. So you want to do as minimum damage to it as possible. And you can bore under sidewalks with them as well. You can dig a trench on either side with the air knife, and then kind of meet it from both sides in the middle. So this is a picture of the vacuum we did on some radial trenching to remove that soil, reinvigorate it. This was a one-time construction project. So compaction was done during construction. So we're just doing a little bit radial trenching to make sure that tree didn't go into decline a couple of years down the road. It's best to be early in our intervention after construction damage than come in after we see decline. You can compact the soil on a tree and you won't see that you harmed it for 4 or 5 years. But by the time you see that decline, they've gone through all their carbohydrate stores and they're much harder to bring back. So anytime you've done construction around trees, make sure they have a healthy growing environment to work with. And we set up this little bit of fencing. You want to kind of treat air excavation almost like a stump grinder. You want to confine your area. It can fling some rocks around that could ding a car or some siding. So you want to confine your area. Here's an example of even how older, larger trees that were mature before landscaping was done can get girdling roots over time. This tree was in a playground, but that playground had mulched year over year over year. And that built up so high, eventually it did cause those large girdling roots around this tree over about 40, 50 years of being in a playground. So getting down there, even though you could see a little bit of a flare, it's not as much of a flare as that tree should have. And there was some tip dieback. And they found some pretty aggressive girdling roots in there that needed to be dealt with. But again, a very large tree, so cutting a 4-inch diameter girdling root on a 38-inch diameter tree, they can recover from that, but it needs to be done. These would probably cause, complete decline in another 20 years. That tree would probably succumb to this issue. Here's just another example of kind of setting up plywood around this. This is area just preparing a planting site with the air knife, getting all that, all that old stump material out, but confining it a little bit just so you're not losing all your material. And here's just a picture left to right from the older version of the vacuum. Had a longer tube. The newer ones, they're a little bit shorter, closer to the ground. They're a little bit easier for most radial trenching, root crown inspections. That shallower work, it just keeps the soil lower, it keeps the weight lower, a little more ergonomic. And this is, again, just a picture when we were doing that radial trenching after construction, to make sure you just have that protective gear up between, where you're working and the houses. Make sure you don't, fling a bunch of dirt in there. They can spray dirt a little distance, so stay safe with them. So what other things we can do about root zone health is mulch. Naturally trees have organic matter getting recycled into it. So in the urban landscape, a lot of pros to it. It's a low material cost, low labor cost to install it, but it helps moderate soil temperatures. In the heat of the day, that mulch is going to absorb some of the heat. It's not going to go straight to the soil where those roots are. It's going to help maintain moisture in the soil, add organic matter over time, and make a permanent change to the soil composition. Some of the cons of mulch is customers may prefer grass. So sometimes you got to twist their arm a little bit, but we're the doctors in this situation. So we have to propose what's best for the plant, and sometimes meet in the middle between what the customers want, balance their expectations. Kind of like when we see doctors ourselves, they give us advice, and they probably prefer if our diets were much healthier, but we all go out to dinner sometimes and make bad choices. But trees are the same way. We do the best we can where we can, but the effects also take time. It can take 5 to 7 years for mulch to naturally decompact soils. They will do it if you have good living cover, good soil, good microbes, good life in the soil, and then it will decompact naturally when they have time and you have younger plants. But some things we can do to speed up the benefits of mulch is feed the microbes in the soil. They are there. If there was no microbes in the soil, the trees would they would be dead. They'd be in hard decline. So if your trees are growing, there is some mycorrhizae down there. There's some microbes, and we can feed them with adding carbohydrates. We'll talk about a carbohydrate product later that helps break that mulch down. We see a lot in this industry. People add mycorrhizae into their plant health care programs, and that can be beneficial, but not always. They can be expensive, but if you're looking at it as mycorrhizae has a symbiotic relationship with the tree and the soil, the tree is giving carbohydrates to what it has, what's there, and in exchange, that mycorrhizae is breaking down organic matter and making nutrients available to the tree. If the tree could support more mycorrhizae by giving them more carbohydrates, it would. So by adding more mycorrhizae to the soil, but not addressing what it needs for that mycorrhizae to thrive, it will just go back to the same levels you had in the beginning. So it can be a waste of money if you don't address the soil and why there can't be more there to begin with. So sometimes just adding carbohydrates in a proper growing environment, the mycorrhizae that's there can just thrive, and you don't need to add additional to it. But again, they can be beneficial under the right situations, but sometimes just working with what's there and making the soil more beneficial to them by adding carbohydrates and kind of subsidizing the trees side of that relationship, they can thrive. We can also add humic acid to the soil, and that increases the cation exchange capacity. And humic acid is basically like faking organic matter until it's there. Or if they don't let you have that mulch bed, adding it to it helps retain moisture and exchange nutrients with the plants. And then, it can help. We can add things to help increase the water and nutrient holding capacity of the soil. So we have the Arbor RX program, which we've designed for tree and shrub nutrition, soil enhancement, root and plant establishment, and soil moisture management. And we made some easy ways to go about that. We have, sorry, the screen's going a little bit slower on mine. So we have a lot of different liquids you can mix, so they don't require mechanical agitation over a lot of the powders or granulars people are using. They're all compatible, and they combine plant nutrition with soil health to make sure we're working with both what the plant needs and what the soil needs. And once those are in symbiosis, that's when you get really healthy plants, and they can start taking care of themselves. We can also include plant growth regulators into tree health, which again we'll talk more about later. But we have flexible products and rates to make easy job estimates, easy mixing, easy instructions. And they start with some charts like this, which we have available for different soil types, what products may be more beneficial in different areas. Adding humic acid, which is Enviroplex, which is 22% humic acid, is great for general maintenance, sandy soils, clay soils. But if you have good organic matter in the soil, you may not choose to add that. You may add the BioMP, which is molasses, to increase microbial activity. So you've got a good pick and choose menu. We do have combination products, which are pretty good for any situation, but it's nice to have the option to be able to dial into different parts of different properties, different customer needs, different tree needs, and kind of not use that one size fits all in every situation. So these are some of the application instructions we have. These are kind of prescription pads that we have available for sales reps or applicators, and you just check off which products you want based on the condition. So, if you want to start with Arborplex, which is a good slow release nitrogen, you mix 1.25 gallons of that per 100 gallons of water. If you wanted to add a little extra humic acid, you check off the Enviroplex, and it has to add 12 ounces of that per 100 gallons. So it makes it very easy to have what you need from what products to address what soil conditions, and help take the guesswork out of it by building these programs for you. And a lot of these additional products that we add, like the Iron Plus, BioMP, seaweed extracts, these only they add maybe 5% to the nutritional program of the tree. So they're very inexpensive to kind of get the most bang for your buck on those soil fertility programs. So you just check those off and mix accordingly for whatever was prescribed, and you're good to go after that. So a little bit more about Arborplex. It is a 50% slow release nitrogen, so it's got consistent extended feeding. It improves stress tolerance, improved vigor, especially in urban trees, and it promotes balanced root and shoot growth. I really like this on healthier plants that are younger in the landscape. If you have mature trees, we have NutriRoot, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But on kind of those younger, established, and semi-mature trees, getting a little nitrogen in there, especially if the soil is lacking it through a test, and putting a little extra growth on younger, healthy trees, they become much more vigorous. And then BioMP, this is the carbohydrate molasses-based soil conditioner. And I love this product again when we have a little bit of lacking microbial activity in the soil. You don't have it breaking down mulch as fast. You don't see that degradation. By adding these carbohydrates to the soil, we're going to increase that microbial activity, break down mulch faster, increase the benefits of that, increase the health of the soil, and improve plant vigor. And it's very inexpensive. It's a 532, so it has a little bit of NPK, but it's more used for those poor nutrient retention soils, poor microbial activity, low water holding capacity, and soils that just aren't interacting with the plant properly. And those are most commonly urban soils. Enviroplex, this is the humic acid product. And this is what helps increase water and nutrient holding capacity. And again, adding organic matter or the effects of organic matter until that mulch breaks down or when you're not allowed to have that mulch. If you lose the battle with the homeowner and they won't let you put in the mulch beds, you can recreate more natural growing environments by using these on a 2 to 3 times annually. You can mimic the conditions of the woods as far as the tree's concerned. You just have to do that annually as part of a program where if you were able to get the mulch in, eventually the trees can build a healthy growing environment. They need a little less input, but you can do this in situations where you're not allowed to have quite the growing environment you want to build. Iron Plus, it's a 1500 with a chelated iron. So for chlorotic trees, this helps kind of boost them, get a little iron in the soil, get them growing, and give you some time to work with that soil. Iron deficiencies in soil are often due to pH issues, and those can take quite some time to correct. So having something where you can get iron available a little quicker is a great option for those trees. And then we also have Minjet FE, which is an injectable iron product for trees that kind of turns them around a little bit quicker and gets past those pH issues. And the injectable irons can last 2 seasons, especially when used in the fall at higher rates. So Cytogrow is a seaweed extract. It is a root growth hormone. It's cytokinins. It's derived from ours is most of them, and ours is taken from North Atlantic seaweeds. But these are basically it's a root growth hormone, so it inspires the plant to grow more fine root hairs without growing outwards. So you get a plant that has much deeper root structure. It's used quite commonly in turf also, but in trees you get a tree that has much more availability to water and nutrients that's there due to that increased root growth. So this helps establishment in trees and new plantings, and also trees that are struggling in those poor soils to help them grow a few more roots when you can work with it. It's a great addition to a soil health program. And then Hydrotane is a hygroscopic humectant. So this is a moisture management product that allows a watering incident, whether from irrigation or rain, to last up to 50% longer in the soil. It helps balance out the moisture profile in the soils. So what this does is, as water tries to evaporate in the soil, this is going to help recondense it and make it available to the plant again. And it's going to help pull humidity from the air and make that available also. So even if there isn't rain or irrigation, it's going to help get moisture into the soil for the plants. So for new plantings, plantings without irrigation especially, this is a great kind of insurance on new plantings or in drought-prone areas and drought-stressed trees. Helping the efficiency of that soil moisture goes a long ways. And it lasts up to 3 months on one application. So, in the north, we can put this down in June and get good coverage through July, August, September. And that's when we're typically seeing most of our droughts. And you can also apply it again in September, which is going to help the plant overwinter if we get droughts throughout the winter, especially on evergreens. It's going to help through periods that might cause desiccation. If you have, that cold breeze pulling moisture off the needles of those plants, keeping a little bit of soil in the moisture and letting them rebound a little bit helps with that winter desiccation. Here is a planting that we had with treated and untreated with Hydrotane. So new plantings, the spiral of death on new plantings is drought stress. So their only response to drought stress is well, not their only response, but one of their responses is to defoliate. They need to lose as little water as possible. So they shed their leaves to shut down transpiration as much as possible when they're stressed out. But on newly planted trees, that also reduces their ability, in this case, almost completely to produce photosynthates. And that's what they need to regrow their roots and establish. So as soon as they go into that drought cycle on new plantings, that starts the 10-year death cycle on these where they never really grow, they never really establish, they stay weakly rooted, and they never quite grow. So making sure they have proper soil moisture when establishing is key to getting healthy plants in the long run. These plants, when they don't establish right, those are the ones in 4 years that you see poor growth, high scale populations, a lot of poor health. So ensuring those plants don't get drought stress in the first couple of years before they're established is key to healthy plantings. And also just keeping your costs down, not having to go back and just replace trees that you've planted with your warranties. NutriRoot is our blend product that has the seaweed extract, the humic acid, the hydrotane, moisture management products, kind of all in one. So it's a great product that has kind of all those things. It doesn't have the BioMP. So on my property, I mix NutriRoot BioMP, and that gives me the best of all worlds. But it's a product that can be used in low volume as a soil health product. It's not an NPK product, 2-2-3. So it's not going to push a lot of growth. So it's great on mature trees and trees that need establishment, because it's going to just increase that soil health, increase the root growth, and make a much hardier plant. And trees in decline respond to it quite well also. Here's a tree that was planted in a shallow soil profile over some rock. And you can see it was planted, it was getting a little chlorotic, wasn't getting enough moisture. So the NutriRoot, once that little bit of iron, has iron, zinc, and manganese available also. So it helps green the plant up, helps moisture available establish, and it starts, putting on that growth because it has a better relationship with the soil and its environment. Here's a tree that just had a little, didn't have a lot of growth, wasn't living up to its potential at all. Chlorotic, definitely an urban area. So being able to work with that soil, having the root growth hormones, the humic acid, allowing for water and nutrients to exchange better with the tree. You can see, after a couple months, 1.5 months in this case, you can see that tree started to respond, came back quite quickly versus looking like a tree that's completely collapsing and almost viable for removal in a couple seasons. You've got something that's starting to come back and have a chance, putting on growth evenly and keeping an even crown. Here's an installation of a landscape. This is my house. I removed both front lawn panels at my property, put in semi-mature trees, not small by any means, put down mulch, and then use the BioMP and the NutriRoot over the seasons. And you can see from 2014 to 2020, in just 6 years, building a healthy soil. We had a very diverse planting that kept a lot of shade on the soil, a lot of shade on the mulch. So we had moderated soil temperatures, even in a very urban environment with sidewalks, pavement, housing. You can have a very lush landscape without having any irrigation. This is an unirrigated planting. It gets what rain has, but using those moisture management products that are, in NutriRoot and the BioMP to help increase that microbial activity, we get a very healthy planting over the years, and still thriving. Now, the birch trees raised up a bit. I don't have a current picture in this presentation today, but here's what we see in the root system of plants that are treated with NutriRoot versus an untreated plant. You see, it doesn't have a very even root system. Smaller, yellow, brown, unhealthy looking roots versus the treated seedlings. You get a very root system that's growing in more directions, more evenly, and that's going to help that plant 20 years down the road. Having that even root structure, seeing opportunity in all directions, having water and nutrient availability, this sets you up for success. So it's great for establishing new plants to make sure they stay healthy 20 years down the road and don't require a lot of input. 20 days post-treatment on some oaks. You can just see they're able to get more nutrients from the soil, help with that chlorotic look using NutriRoot granular. Cranberry seedlings, a much healthier root mass on that younger plant. And using something that's not high in NPK, you can still see how much more growth you can get just by letting the tree and soil have a better relationship. Red oak saplings, much more growth, growing much quicker, much more root, just a happier plant. So calculating costs is a big part of plant healthcare also. You have to know what it costs you to treat these trees to be able to bid them accordingly. So for NutriRoot as a liquid, a gallon of it goes for about $99.99. So it costs about $1 per gallon if you're using the traditional mix, if you use a gallon per 100 gallons. And then, knowing your cost per tree to treat, I like to use a gallon per inch in diameter, so it keeps things simple for me. So it's costing me about $1 per inch in diameter to treat trees. So I know a 20-inch tree is $20 worth of material, 5-inch trees, $5. Keeps it consistent across the board. And then you can work in your pricing structure from there. Some people are charging $5 to $8 per inch in diameter knowing their material cost and tree cost. It's much easier to bid work that way. For the granular, it has a pretty similar cost per DBH, 92 cents per inch. But you can use this in containerized plantings, top dressing on existing planting beds. You may not want to drag a traditional deep root feed needle through a perennial bed of flowers. You can overcast with the granular for about the same cost. It's basically just a choice of application method. They're going to have the same effect on the soil. They have mostly the same amounts of each ingredient, all the same ingredients. And we have the AccuFlow, which is a great option for injecting the NutriRoot liquid. You can set that between 10 to 300 milliliters. So you can just set the dose for the tree to your mix rate and just have a very predictable, easy amount. So you're not over applying, you're not using extra material. It's lightweight, easy to carry around a property. Works great with plant growth regulators, again, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. Right now, moving into those actually. So paclobutrazol is the most common plant growth regulator active ingredient in tree care. So Shortstop 2SE is our version of it. It is a type 2 plant growth regulator, which means it's a cell elongation inhibitor. There are plant growth regulators that are cell division inhibitors. Those are more commonly used for herbicides, actually, but they can sometimes be used to reduce the growth in plants. But we don't want to stop cell division. We kind of want that in the plant. We just want to limit how much it can elongate in some landscapes. And that allows the tree to have leftover energy for more roots, more root hairs, more root mass, carbohydrate storage, but more self-defense compounds, more importantly. So using paclobutrazol, which again is a type 2 PGR, might have said that twice because it may be on the quiz later, and it is a cell elongation inhibitor. So when you can apply these, they can be applied anytime during the growing season. The first year response, if you're using it as just a growth regulator, if you do it in the beginning of the season, you'll see a little bit of reduction, but it's more than next season is where you'll see up to an 85% reduction on some plants. Crab apples, oaks, maples, I see more 60% reduction. Where some conifers like blue spruce, you'll get some health benefits, not so much growth regulation, but you will also see benefits. But anytime during the growing season is when we can apply these. The residual for them varies based on the length of the growing season. So here in the northern climates, we can get up to 4 years out of a treatment for health benefits and growth regulation. We're very southern parts of Florida where it's nonstop growing year round. They may only last a year to 2 years. So just kind of know your environment for where you're using these and just kind of follow those guidelines on when to reapply. If it has a 4-year residual from a short growing season, if you were to apply it every year, you would start to overregulate that plant. So just stick to the guidelines on that. So here's year over year on oak, just some examples. And you can see that elongation on the untreated tree versus the treated. And oaks are a determinate plant. So in the bud, they already have as many leaves as they're going to put out in the new growth that season. So you'll have just as many leaves. They'll be a little bit closer together, but you'll have a much darker, greener foliage. It thickens the leaf cuticle on the plant. It leaves more energy for that, so they can control transpiration much better by closing down the stomata tighter. So you'll see it has a much more efficient photosynthetic process from that deeper green, which allows it to produce even more photosynthate. So the health benefits of using PGRs on large trees is not just for growth regulation, but you get a much hardier plant and bang for your buck, especially where I am in the north, getting 3 years out of one treatment to be able to give a plant that much of a head start to produce all those self-defense compounds. Oaks produce tannins just to fight off insect and disease pressure on their own without using pesticides and upsetting that natural balance by using a plant growth regulator instead. So how it works is it goes up through the tree and gets into the terminal buds of the plant, right in that apical meristem. And what it does is it reduces gibberellic acid, which causes less elongation, and that's the plant growth regulation. But secondly, it increases abscisic acid. And the reaction the plant has to the increase in that is it creates a thicker leaf. It produces more chlorophyll, more fibrous roots, and more defense compounds. So again, that's where it really helps trees defend themselves. So on conifers, they'll produce more terpenes. On oaks, more tannins. And tannins are very bitter and upsetting to insects when they eat them. So if you have even a spongy moth infestation on trees that have higher tannins, they won't be able to eat as much. They won't get through their life cycle as fast. And they'll have a much higher natural death rate when eating those trees that are higher in tannins. Spongy moth quite often you do have to treat, especially in urban environments, with pesticides just because they can completely defoliate a tree. But it is just kind of an example of how they can better defend themselves against leaf-feeding insects. So in theory, trees generally use most of their energy for shoot growth and reproduction. And that makes sense naturally. That's their natural growth habits in the forest would be claim some light so you can get some energy and then make sure the next generation is there to survive. But when we take these trees out of their natural environment and put them in the urban environment, we've got a tree in the middle of a front lawn. It doesn't need to dominate the sky. It already has the sky. Um, we can take the energy from that bucket and let it use it more for root growth, defense compounds, and storing energy for a rainy day. So with treated trees, we see that shoot growth comes down, and a lot of that energy gets moved over into the fine root growth and the defense compounds of the plant. And this is what's beneficial in our environment because, we don't need that tree to keep growing as fast and as much as it can, especially once they're mature. If you've got, a 60-foot tall maple in the front yard, getting it to 80 is not always the priority. Making sure that tree stays healthy for 20, 30, 40 to 100 years, even if you pass down the plant healthcare plan, with as minimal use of pesticides is a great way to keep plants healthy. Increases drought resistance. This is untreated versus treated trees out in Colorado. And you can see the plant and when they get that drought stress, they don't have enough water to cool the leaves, and you'll see them start to burn back and die back versus the treated tree that can help keep moisture in there, close transpiration down a little bit tighter and keep the leaves cooler. You don't have that dieback and burning that you get from that drought. Cytospora canker on blue spruce. This is a disease that's exacerbated by drought. There's no real cure for cytospora canker on blue spruce, but plant growth regulators have been found. Morton Arboretum did some great research on it. PGRs can reduce the prevalence of the cankers by 60 to 70%. So taking a disease that doesn't quite have a cure that can cause quite a bit of damage and slowing that down greatly really helps you allow to even plant a new tree in the landscape and let it get 10 or 20 years to establish and look great and slow down the decline of that other tree on the property. So you don't have that shock of fast decline. It gives you a little more time to work with the problem. Sycamore anthracnose. This is one that growth regulators also work quite well on. It can be a tough disease to manage foliarly. You might have to spray that tree 3 times in the spring, but with that thicker leaf cuticle, they become more resistant to the disease. So it has a harder time attaching to the leaf tissue. And that kind of breaks that life cycle because it does damage to the twig and then it spores and gets back on the leaf and then goes from the leaf back to the twig. So if you can keep it from getting on the leaf, you can stop it from getting back on the twigs and causing that witch's broom. And PGRs are very easy to apply. The soil injector that we talked about a little earlier, right around the base of the tree, just a probe 4 to 6 inches deep. If you don't have a soil injector, you can just dig a moat around the base of the tree and then apply that evenly. You want to follow the label to make sure that you're using the right rate for the right tree. But just right around the base of the tree. It's not all the way out to the drip edge, just right around the base. So it's very fast application, very efficient, and long-lasting plant healthcare results. So it's a good thing to work into your programs. And that soil injector we have comes in a 4-gallon or 9-gallon with a 20-foot hose. If you're using larger properties, so it has some adaptability in volume as well. So here's just an example of those rates that you want to follow. An ash tree that grows a little more aggressively is on the higher end of the chart. You see it takes 200 milliliters per inch in diameter, where something like a linden, they're a little more sensitive to it, still aggressive growing, but they're down in the 87.5 mils per inch in diameter. So you're always mixing this product 1 part concentrate to 11 parts water, and then using so much of that solution per inch in diameter. And that's where that AccuFlow comes in real nice because you can do several different tree species on the property by mixing up that consistent batch and then just adjusting the volume dosage on the equipment between species. You can just set it at the 150 rate for a catalpa, give it 1 injection per inch in diameter, adjust it down to the 100 for a basswood or a live oak, and just easily move through like that efficiently without always digging, trenching, and mixing batches independently for every tree. So it can be quite efficient, but follow those rates. You don't want to overregulate trees, or you can get smaller leads. And mistakes do happen, but that's another good thing. If you do overregulate a tree, go back to the supersonic air knife and you can excavate that soil out right around the base where you applied it, and help kind of recover from that a little bit. But if you follow the rules, follow the label, you don't really run into those issues. So different types of treatment methods. We have soil drenches and soil injections, bark sprays. There are some equipment out there. There can be injections. Those are fast, but they can split the bark. So you want to make sure you're doing the right kind of tree injections. Bark sprays can be easy to apply, but there's a little bit of a leaching risk and using higher concentration. So considering what the effects and drawbacks are to each application method, all goes into deciding how we're going to treat a tree. Soil drenches and injections, especially on if you're using neonicotinoids, they can have acreage limitations, so you might not be able to treat as many trees as you want. And also with soil drenches of pesticides, I don't think it looks that professional very often. So soil injections, I think, look a little more professional. But then we also have foliar cover sprays, tree injections from caps, micro infusion, and macro infusion, high volume. So micro infusion is probably where the widest range of equipment options and new technology is coming out. And this is a great option for the urban environment because we can treat large trees with a minimum amount of product, with minimal effect on surrounding trees, pests. We can use targeted medicinaments efficiently. Caps are the same kind of thing. It's a low volume injection, but the caps are low pressure, where micro infusion, we can use higher pressure and plugged injection systems. So leaf sprays, if we are going to go for a leaf spray option, we want to make sure when possible we use something that is a little more pointed, like BT. It has a few days residual. It's effective on caterpillars, but only on early instars. So this is where monitoring a property has a lot of benefits. So you're trying to get out there so you can use something like BT that's going to affect Lepidoptera, but not all beneficial insects. Azadirachtin is a great insect growth regulator. Fatty acids, soaps, spinosad have a several week residuals. Those are great options that'll have a minimal impact for doing foliar cover sprays. Then you have your non-botanical sprays like pyrethrins, carbaryl, acephate. These are kill 'em all products. They will definitely knock down the pest you're trying to kill, but they're also going to knock down a lot of beneficials. Pyrethrins can have quite a bit of a residual also. Acephate can be toxic to the applicator as well. But these ones are kind of older pesticides as far as design go, but you can interrupt a lot of natural process by using some of those, especially if you spray them on large trees. If you're trying to control caterpillars early season and use, permethrin, you could end up with big mite problems later on in the season just because there's no beneficial insects like to control those problems. So sprays, other things to consider is regardless of what product you're using, sprayer height, rig cost, leaf size, wind, neighbors, these can all kind of hinder your ability to treat trees predictably. But through visually, you've got good coverage. Again, there are products that are quite effective on shrub care, especially foliar is quite a effective method when you have to use pesticides. But just keep it in mind when you're spraying taller trees on that drift, on neighbors, and even sometimes just on perception in neighborhoods, watching where that stuff kind of goes. Soil applications, again, neonics, a lot of negativity on those. They're not that effective on certain pests, and on other pests they can be quite problematic. You get a lot of mite issues if you overuse neonicotinoids. And you have acreage limitations, but soil drenching things like phosphites for some foliar diseases or Phytophthora can be quite effective. So they do have their place, but knowing when and where to use them is a great balance in the world. So interesting story about this picture on the right. That's actually the oldest tree in the city of Buffalo. That's a sycamore that gets anthracnose, and we actually treated that tree this morning on the Saving America's Iconic Trees program. So fun to have that in there. That's a 64-inch, or I forget the exact diameter. It's quite large. You can see it next to that car. But using plant growth regulator to help control anthracnose in an urban environment on an old tree that just needs as little stress as possible, it was a great application. But anyway, trunk injection. We're not limited by equipment regardless of tree size. So it's the same tree injection piece of equipment to seed a 12-inch diameter ash tree or a 140-foot tall hemlock for hemlock woolly adelgid. So the equipment cost is low, and it's also very versatile. There's solutions for serious insect and vector diseases. So there's most of those serious issues we'll talk about more later, but turpentine beetles, southern pine beetle, its beetles, great control methods for those without affecting a large area. And it's the right tool for each situation. We're not harming the total environment. We're not closing off areas. Injection is a great way to work in urban environments. and we can have a wider window for treatments for better pest management, reduced weather days. Um, we can treat in the fall for spring problems rather than having all your plant healthcare in one window. So kind of mixing and matching all these different application methods, knowing their pros and cons, helps you build a more versatile plant healthcare program. And that's what you need to be profitable and efficient, is knowing the best times and windows when you can treat a problem. Certain issues like hemlock woolly adelgid, there's 15 different ways to treat that pest, but knowing when, where, and why to apply those different methods to scenarios is how you really become efficient and profitable. So again, when picking your treatment method and product for control, always try to find one that has the lowest impact on the surrounding area. You don't want to upset nature in that balance. There are native praying mantises, and non-native praying mantises. But one great thing about them is when you do have them, you've got a very healthy ecosystem. They're a top-tier predator in the environment, but they're very easy to wipe out with the overuse of pesticides. So I see them as a good luck charm, even though some see them as an invasive, the Asian varieties. But they're a top-tier predator. So when you see these on a landscape, you can be proud that you've got a nice, balanced ecosystem going on. So some serious pest and disease issues that you pretty much have to address, that you can't just work your way through with healthy soils or addressing urban soils, are something like emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer doesn't care if the tree is healthy or not. It's going to go after pretty much all American varieties of ash and find them. So it must be treated for. So doing nothing is taking a choice. If you don't treat for emerald ash borer when it's in the area, your tree's going to die. But knowing when you can intervene and when things have gone too far is also part of the program. You can see in that top right picture, that tree on the left, that one's too far gone, versus that tree on the right, that's still quite savable. The one on the right was previously treated, and you can see how effective it is, even if you choose one tree and not another. Injections with triage, which is emamectin benzoate, is very effective for 2 years against this pest. But you want to interact early with this when you hear it gets in the area, because the death curve that happens with the AB is, as soon as it shows up and they find it, usually around year 4 or 5 in the area, you've got 2 or 3 years to make your plans, alert your customers, get your inventories done before that death curve really picks up. You can see by 12 years after it's introduced in an area, that's when you have very few options left. Nature's kind of made its choice. So you want to act soon when this is introduced in new areas. I know out in Washington State, it's new in a few areas. In Maine, it still gets to a new counties. It's throughout Vermont now over the last 5 years. But it still is popping into some new spots. But here's the effect it can have quickly over time on a neighborhood. From 2011 to 2013, on a municipality that chose not to do anything, that's a massive impact that's going to have on home values, on heating and cooling costs, just on positive mental attitude when you come home at the end of the day. So again, making sure you treat early when you hear about this pest. Don't wait for it to make up its mind for your customers. Get out ahead of it. And then 60% thinning, removal likely. 30% thinning, you've got a good treatable tree. So right around that 40% thinning is where you want to say this tree may be a little too far gone. If it's a memorial tree, you can treat them. It might use some retrenchment in the future. You can probably work with it quite a bit from, some of those suckers on the stem, in extreme cases of saving those. But generally, once it's in 40% decline, you'd pass on trying to treat that one. Hemlock woolly adelgid. This is another one that if you have hemlocks and you don't consistently have winters that get below 0 degrees frequently, this one's going to find your hemlocks. It's slowly moving north. It's getting into the Adirondacks in New York more frequently now. In Connecticut, it's been there for quite some time. We had a cold year 4 years ago where it got down to -10 and it wiped out about 95% of it. But they're pretty much back in full force now. So hemlocks, as the climate warms, this pest is spreading north, and this is something you have to address. And here's kind of where infestations before 2020 have moved. And now, again, they're moving along that northern line a little bit further in, definitely deeper into Nova Scotia, northern New York. But there's a lot of hemlocks left that over the next 30 years, as the climate warms, they're going to be able to move into. So it's a serious pest to keep an eye on. And this is one where injections of imidacloprid, you can get 5 years control on one treatment against this pest. It's very easy to treat for, affordably, effectively for your customers. The cost per inch on treating for hemlock woolly adelgid is around $1.70 per inch in diameter for an injection. So it's low material cost, and for a 5-year treatment, talking on pricing, we'll talk more about that later. But great option for a tree to save is hemlocks, and they're a keystone species. They support a lot of wildlife. They sequester a lot of stormwater, and they love these damp environments. They tend to be a stand tree. There's lots of them. Usually when you find hemlocks, there's groves of them. So it's worth saving those environments. But you get these white masses on the needles. You'll get some yellowing. And that's when you know it's really starting to take over. Pine bark beetles are getting more common on stressed out conifers, again, drought stress. So southern pine beetle, that's a native insect to the southern parts of the United States. But again, that one's moving north. We're seeing it now on Cape Cod. We're seeing it move in to the southern parts of Connecticut, and even a little bit further inland into Massachusetts. So these pests are kind of moving north, and they can carry blue stain fungus, which is another vector disease that they're bringing that can collapse trees pretty quickly. And then we have kind of their life cycle. They're 1 generation per year on some of these. So you just want to intervene early, though, before they kind of explode and take over in any given area. Larger ones like turpentine beetles attack lower in the stem on the tree, so you'll see them very obviously, where southern pine beetle will attack more up in the crown. But you'll always see little pitch masses quite often from the conifer's response to these beetles. Ips is probably one of the worst ones. It goes after 25 species in the west, going after pines and spruce primarily, but extremely destructive dendroctonous species, but easily controlled with an injection with the triage. You can get 2 years control on this pest and not have to worry about that. Some other ways that it's been treated is with foliar sprays, but you can see how in an urban environment, how treating foliarly, because you're trying to get all those scaffolding branches treated with a systemic pesticide before they bore in and lay their eggs, chunk injection can be a much better option to control trees from this pest in urban environments. And some research that was done with the Texas Forest Service just on the efficacy of triage on that pest and percent mortality. And, throughout the season, throughout the months, even after 25 months, you still have great efficacy on that pest for 2-year retreatment intervals versus untreated trees. Oak wilt, this one, once it's in your area, it can kill red oak species quite quickly. It can also affect live oaks. It affects them a little bit slower, but treatment with an injection of propiconazole is the best way to go about this. In really aggressive areas, they do trenching also between trees to sever grafted roots, so the disease can't go from tree to tree. But injections of propiconazole, these formulations have evolved over the years where they can be done quite efficiently now. Some of the propiconazole injections that were done in the 90s were diluted 49-1. So you're injecting liters of product per inch in diameter, where now the newer formulations of propiconazole, we're only diluting them 2 to 3 parts water. So, we can treat an oak tree in 20, 30 minutes for oak wilt versus 2-3 hours with those macro injections, or even longer in some drought areas. So this can be spread by nidodulid beetles on fresh cuts. You want to pay attention to pruning, what time you're pruning these trees. Also, if you have oak wilt in the area, because it can attract those insects. So don't prune them from February through June, even through later in the summer. Really, if you have to, you'd want to paint the wounds. And if you get strong thunderstorms that come through and have breaks on trees on high value properties, call your customers, inspect those trees, find those breaks, and maybe paint those to not attract those nidodulid beetles when there's oak wilt in the area. So varying displays of foliar symptoms on live oak. You can see they have interveinal chlorosis. They'll still have the green veins, but you can have interveinal dieback. But on the other hand, you can also see that they can respond other ways as well. So you'll see defoliation. So a sample sent to an extension is the best way to identify this problem if it's new in the area. But once it's more common, you start to get a little more in tune to how it looks. On red oaks, you'll see these fungal pads that can kind of form under the bark. And these are hard to find, but they are a telltale. If you see the bark kind of explode in a cross pattern and see one of these fungal mats, that's a pretty good telltale sign that it was oak wilt that brought that tree into decline and brought it down. Another issue that's been gaining steam is coconut rhinoceros beetle. These are pretty big beetles. They go after coconut palms, and we can treat these with an injection of imidacloprid but they're quite big beetles, the coconut rhinoceros beetle, and they're just devastating on palms and in quite a few areas. So knowing how to control this pest when there is no really other option, there's no walking away from it. This one will kill palms in native areas or high value residential areas. So lastly, kind of the last section is how to position, price, and sell plant healthcare services. And this is where a little bit of those kind of ethics come into it, is positioning and selling that. So it's kind of modified integrated pest management. We're looking at a complete plant healthcare factor. So we want to look at the plant species. Again, going back to that, do we want to add a little habitat manipulation? Do we want more diverse plantings? Were the trees planted in the right location to begin with? How viable would treating that tree be? Looking at the condition of those plants, the value of those plants. And this is where a lot of those go into those certification classes like tree and plant appraisal, knowing the value of what plants are in the landscape to help explain to a customer, how much those trees are worth, the risk assessment to know if that tree is even viable to save or if it's a hazard on the property. That all goes into plant healthcare management, and pricing and selling those things, because you want to make sure you're treating the right trees in the right way, and not the wrong ones. And you also have to take in personal attachment to plants. You don't want to walk into a property. I've even had this happen to myself, where you walk in and you see somebody's got a Norway maple that maybe has verticillium wilt. It's in decline. You can slow it down, but in our mind, we're thinking invasive species, big deal. Let's just get rid of it and plant something else. But talk to your customer. That might be a memorial tree that they planted for their grandfather 20 years ago. It might be a tree they got from Arbor Day 20 years ago before they're on the invasive species list. And that tree may mean a lot to the customer more than what that species is. So knowing location, condition, attachment to the customer environment, mechanical, does the tree have included bark? Does it have girdling roots? Does it have root stakes still tied to it? So really taking a good look at the property before we decide when and where we want to take the chemical approach to control pests, and what we want to do naturally. But why your business kind of needs plant healthcare is healthy plants are important to your customers. Most of them aren't just calling you when trees are dying to take them down, especially in the urban environment. People take pride in their landscapes. So healthy plants and being the person that can provide those healthy plants to people helps repeat business. They're renewable services. And what we want to do in plant healthcare, especially in the IPM approach, they're renewable in that we want to become an asset to those homeowners in monitoring their plants, not always necessarily treating them, but being on the property several times a year to monitor them. We want to be known as the expert that's getting trained for our mind and our eyes, not just to show up to blanket spray pesticides. You can also have much larger customer base that way as well. There's very high margins in plant healthcare, especially when you get properties down to that monitoring stage, because then you don't have very high chemical inputs. It's, again, where you're getting paid to be the professional, to walk the property, look for beneficial insects, make sure things are heavy, know when to intervene, and not blanket spraying. If you use pesticides kind of as a crutch to keep pest problems low, rather than designing landscapes and encouraging natural landscapes, that cuts into your margins. So it's much more profitably when done ethically with the environment in mind and being leaned on as the expert in the field. It lets you be a full service tree care provider. So when people call for their properties, you're not taking the trees down and then hiring it out, the plant healthcare, who might be a company that also takes trees down. Customers like to work with one contact. They like relationships. They like professionalism. So being able to take care of removals, pruning, plant health, and knowing the full aspect of their property really goes a long way in building your business and helping your reputation build, which word of mouth, man, if you get recommended for saving a tree, if somebody says, I thought I was going to lose this tree at family Christmas, and then they're so happy it lived, they're going to tell that story and people are going to hear your name and it's going to spread. Man, there's no easier way to sell work than on a good reputation and professionalism. And you're helping people. Trees help people. It can be quite upsetting losing mature trees. So knowing what pests can be treated for, knowing how to turn trees around, being honest with your customers, helps build that business year over year. So again, why you need it and not just your business is it is quite profitable over general tree care. Again, growing your business, it's better for the environment. Reputation in the community is always top notch. Professional development, keeping up with courses, just being in tune with nature a little more, knowing what invasive insects are coming around, knowing what seasonal stresses can help do that. just really set you apart from other tree companies or even plant healthcare companies that aren't thinking that deeply about it. It's better on your body. Climbing trees every day is hard. I was a climber for 10 years and did plant healthcare for quite a time. And it's just much easier, especially as, you can climb quite efficiently now. And I know some climbers that do it quite well, but in general, it's a lot less labor. It's a lot easier on your joints. And it's a great lifestyle. It's very relaxing to go out and do plant healthcare. Tree injection, I think, is kind of fun, giving the tree a shot, solving problems. It's just pretty chill. You can listen to music, just, vibe with nature basically, and have a great day. Because again, once you get down to monitoring properties, you're just walking around looking at beautiful trees, shrubs, plants, enjoying some of the finest properties in town, building that reputation. So healthy landscapes increase property value for your customers, reduces their future expenses on removal and replacement costs, doesn't exhaust their budgets on over application of pesticides. And also, the great thing about monitoring and treating trees when needed is you can monitor on rainy days. You don't have downtime in your plant healthcare when you've got a list of properties that you're just walking around and taking a look at. So peace of mind and safety also. People want to know their trees are not going to become hazardous, not in decline and becoming weak and causing safety issues, keeps up appearances. Again, those emotional connections people have with their landscapes, especially when people live at the same house for 20, 30 years, they've seen those trees grow. They may have planted many of them themselves. So it's great to kind of have that connection with customers. And that's what helps build those plant healthcare programs, helps you be more profitable, helps you become more of a whole tree care and plant care business versus just general tree care. So considerations on your plant healthcare opportunities is knowing the plant material in the area and what causes the most problems. Pretty much everywhere in the Northeast, blue spruce was a really common tree to get put in through the 80s and 90s. And now it's very hard to find a blue spruce that doesn't have health problems. And a lot of times that's one, where you might want to recommend replacement if the tree isn't a huge, real attachment to the customer. So knowing when to replace some trees are plant healthcare opportunities. Planting is plant healthcare, an establishment. But then knowing also plant material, like if you have those ash trees nearby, knowing when EAB is coming to town. If you have hemlocks, are the seasons warming? Is oak wilt coming to town? So have good tree inventories of the properties in your area, so you know what customers to call when you have areas, and you can do direct marketing to them, and those are your opportunities. When I used to manage a tree preservation company, I would have the sales team go out, and I'd be like, take care of take note of the important trees on those properties, so we know who owns oaks, ash, elm, what kind of spruces they have, pines. So whenever a new disease comes to town, I could look through those past work. I could search for keywords in my customer management software and find everybody that put money into pruning an oak tree that might be very interested to find out if oak wilt was coming to town. And those direct leads and opportunities set you apart because you alerted your customer to a possible problem, but also allowed you to capitalize on that issue and make some good money in plant healthcare. So existing pests, again, knowing where they are, knowing where they're expanding to, knowing those hot spots in your area, that's what helps you build these opportunities. So keeping in mind your location and those pests and overlapping them. And then knowing when to treat for these problems. You want to make sure you have the proper licensing, of course, if you're going to get involved in the application of pesticides and plant growth regulators in quite a lot of areas. Where we're talking about those soil health with the air knife and compost, things like that. Not really licensing considerations as much there. But again, if you're going to intervene chemically, you do need those licenses and talk to your local extensions on what that might be. But again, be aware of treatment timing. If you're going to intervene with a pesticide, make sure you're doing it effectively at the right time of year. Make sure you're using the right product for the situation. The life cycle is appropriate. The weather is appropriate. You don't want to spray trees when it's about to rain or when it's going to be windy. High threats of thunderstorms can overuse pesticides because it can negate the efficacy of them. And that's where tree injection can be beneficial because you don't have to worry so much about the weather. So as an example of how we would go about treating certain issues is, say you have aphids on a plant. If you know it's going to be a problem every year on this tree, you can preventively do things with imidacloprid. You can soil apply it. You can trunk inject it. You can do trunk sprays with dinotefuran. If you have active populations, you can trunk inject, soil apply, canopy spray. But knowing which one of these you're going to pick based on what's fast acting, what's less labor, what's the cheapest chemical. These are all things you have to take into consideration to be profitable. So it's very low labor to bark drench with dinotefuran, but you have to take into consideration um, wind speed. It's low labor, but it's higher product cost. It's not as fast acting as a trunk injection, but kind of knowing the property, knowing your customers, knowing when and where to interact with these pests and control, all sets in how you might price yourself in the market, describe the treatment process to your customers, and decide if you're going to do something about it or maybe not. Considerations, 40 to 60% renewable treatments. A lot of diseases and treatments do have to be done year over year. They're not ones that get transferred to modern treat. Again, that's Dutch elm disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, oak wilt, emerald ash borer, all these invasive issues that aren't native to our environment. Those are ones that are going to be renewable treatments. And then sometimes you're going to propose new treatments. You're going to move on from using, say, neonicotinoid to control hemlock woolly adelgid on a hedge to maybe you're going to start using horticultural oil, something a little more environmentally friendly. And then repropose the previous. Again, don't always do that. Don't just go through and regenerate all your work orders and do the same thing. Your customers will ask questions. The more professional companies that are more knowledgeable in IPM aren't going to be doing that. So you want to make sure you're doing it ethically, not over applying pet chemicals. You're not charging your customer to apply chemicals unnecessarily. You're not treating trees that are doomed anyway because of too much decay or included bark. So again, making sure you're doing it ethically and moving more towards monitoring and treating for pests rather than kind of just doing those same repropose the previous year's thing year over year. Helps you become more professional, helps you schedule more balanced, and know your market. But again, knowing those 40 to 60% renewable treatments, those are a lot of pests what people key in on because they know they need a 2-year cycle treatment, a 1-year cycle treatment, those ones that come back. But the ones that don't come back, you want to move those to building client relationships. So you're moving into those monitoring situations. And then considerations on pricing your PHC services, know your market. Talk to some other people about it that might be a little bit outside of your market area. Ask them what they're charging. Get to know people through, your local ISA organization. Strike up these things, but be consistent. Charge by per inch on fertilizers, per square foot, per tree. Pick a method that works for you and kind of stick with it. Pests for treatment method. You can know your chemical and equipment costs, hours needed for treatment, routing, plant location on the property. If you've got one tree that you need to treat and it's way out in the middle of nowhere, you might have to charge a little bit more for that tree than you would just to make sure that you're staying profitable and efficient. Sometimes you can't take every job, but as you grow, sometimes taking that one job that's a little further away, as you build your customer base there, as you're getting known, it pays off in the end. So kind of considering your business model and how you're going to price your PHC services is how you kind of build these things over time and get used to it. And knowing the time required for the application, and always taking office admin and billing considerations. There's a lot of behind the scenes work in routing, scheduling, mailing bills twice when they're not paid on time. Consider those things also when you're pricing your plant healthcare services. So an example for treatment options for treating conifer bark beetles, and say you got 28 trees, 20-inch average on the property. You can either go annual sprays. You can do that. Mixed routed time sprays, 6 visits over 2 years. You got a lot of labor involved there, a lot of driving. You could use a general use emamectin benzoate like Triage G4, and you could inject that tree not using plugs. 2 applicators, you could expect that to take about 9 hours. So you got about 18 hours labor if you want to go with the general use pesticide, if you didn't have your restricted use license. Or option 3, if you have your restricted use license, you can use a more concentrated emamectin benzoate like Triage R10. Use the Quick Jet Air, which is a more Cadillac of an injection system over a tree IV. Number 4 plug, so you can use higher pressure, and you can get through those 20 trees with 1 applicator in 4 hours. So getting the proper licensing, using the proper equipment, and picking what works for you, helps you keep your price competitive, but also helps you be more profitable. So if you're getting the same job done in 4 hours with one person as 2 applicators for 9 hours, you can charge a little bit less, but you can still charge what saving the tree is worth and just make more money per hour, picking the right application method there. So injection things that can help speed up the application for you is on conifers especially, drill, plug, inject one at a time. Don't set all your plugs. They will start trying to push resin into that injection site immediately. So kind of drill, set the plug, inject one at a time. On deciduous trees, um, they're not as quickly to respond to drilling, so you can set all your plugs first and inject that after. But on conifers, resinous conifers, you want to do one at a time. Inject low into the root flare. Drill slightly deeper of a hole on resinous conifers than you would on a deciduous tree. Make sure you're using sharp drill bits, number 4 plugs, the highest concentrate AI you're licensed to use. You don't need to dilute the product for boring insects. And if you have low canopy trees, talk to the customer about raising those canopies up prior to injection. Send a couple of people out there for that labor instead of your plant healthcare tech trying to raise up trees when they don't have the proper equipment with them. And good soil moisture and cooler temps during application increases transpiration of the tree, which increases the speed of application. Another scenario is for product cost. You can either do product cost plus your hourly rate once you get more consistent with knowing how long it's going to take you to treat the tree. So for example, it'll cost you $1.76 an inch per diameter for the material. You like to charge $300 an hour. It's going to take you about $50 stop minimum, 20 minutes to treat the tree, so you're at $185. Or if you know that product well and how long it goes in, you can just say product cost times 5, which comes out on this tree to about $176. So it's fairly equal. Just use a method that works for you. Product cost times 5, you have to adjust per product though. If you have more expensive products that inject faster into the tree, just be consistent on those. You don't want to use a very expensive product that might be very fast and do the times 5. So different scenarios. Ask a friend what they're doing if you're new to it. But again, you got to keep profitable. 1-year treatments, you charge a little bit less for it. You're going to be there more often. 2-year treatments, you might be able to go $10 to $15 per inch on injections, and 3-year treatments, $15 to $20 per inch in diameter. And then coming in the off seasons and doing some monitoring. So 2-year treatments at the $10 an inch, you're right around $200. And in most markets I've seen for trunk injection, that's right in the ballpark of where people are. And then always take pictures of before and after, especially with chlorotic trees. You can really turn those things around with plant growth regulators and injectable iron. Build your portfolio on these. And even with customers, sometimes they forget how bad their property looked before you got involved. So, give them the proposal, and sometimes just show them some of the successes on their own property. Build these things over the years to help build your own reputation and help show customers what their tree's potential is when you see common issues and diseases. Before and after pictures speak 1,000 words. Telling a customer you can turn a tree around or showing them examples of how you have get totally different responses. So even with the PGRs, having those treated, untreated side-by-side pictures of how it can increase the health of the trees and how they look. Just having those. And then, be the expert, be a professional, dress professional, look the part. When you're bidding work, it's tough when you're a smaller company and you're, an owner operator and you're doing your bids after work. So, if you're the climber, you're covered in resin, you're dirty. It does go a bit of a way to kind of get cleaned up, to go, look the professional, look the part before you go and do some of those bids. Have your diagnosis checklist. Have how you go through the property, whether you start from the crown down or the roots up. Be consistent and have your checklist what you're looking for: diseases, insects, root crown, root flares, girdling roots, soil quality, soil compaction. See what you're going for, and then listen to the customers. Know what their issues with the property are. Know why they called you. Chat with them. Talk to them. Find out why their plants are important to be able to build that rapport. Then you can provide a professional proposal that addresses their, unique issues and concerns, and then discuss your solutions. Educate the customer. Don't go too deep into the technical. You don't need to go over their head. Make sure it's something you could explain to a 10th grader and they would understand it. We like to be technical and scientific and, but try to keep it simple, but educate them on what needs to be done and why. Have that sales process, ask for feedback, ask for a referral, ask for a Google review. Don't be shy after a success to ask for those things. That really helps build your reputation. So sales philosophy, kind of how you help go through this sales process with new customers. Position yourself, explain a little bit about your background, how maybe your passion at trees, explain your company that they've been into plant healthcare, kind of start building that rapport on a little bit of your background and why you might be the right person to help look at their property. And then if you're there even to just look at, a pruning or something and you see a health issue, ask them for permission to talk about it. Don't just start spewing off plant healthcare problems that are on their property. They're like, hey, while I was looking at this hanger you called us for, I noticed your oak tree out there might not be too bad. Would you want to discuss what some things I might have saw on the property were? And they'll say, yeah, definitely. Ask for that permission. Don't just start going off. They may not care, but that gets them involved in the conversation, and they feel like you're bringing them in, and you've got information to offer, and now they want it. And then identify the pain. In that conversation, you want to see so you're talking about the problem, and then you hear, yeah, I really love that tree. I hate that it looks like that. I didn't know I could do anything about it. And then you're confirming that emotion. You're saying, I know you care about that tree. That's, we all have our favorites. And then position yourself to have that solution. Be like, that's when you say, but we can do something about that. So it's kind of that wholesale cycle. And then ask for the sale. Don't just say we can do something about this. Be like, go more towards, would you like to go, for the treatment option? You can start turning this tree around. Make sure you ask for that sale at the end, and then follow up. After you've had that success, get a referral, and then this sales cycle is just a flywheel. It just keeps going. You build more customers like this, and just working through. But finding out what it is that their actual problem is, and then identifying a solution to their problems, finding out what plants they care about. And then again, asking for that sale, getting those follow-up referrals, getting those Google reviews. That's what really helps to build those plant healthcare flywheels for the future to come. So with that in review, look at the whole picture. Try to get nature to take care of itself is always the best way, because then you don't have a lot of input costs, but you're getting paid to look around. Intervene when you need to. Identify the root of the problem, pun intended. Make sure you have root flares on those trees that should have them. Make sure you don't have girdling roots. Maintain healthy soils, and you'll have much healthier plants. Manage growing conditions. Consistent pricing and services. You want to make sure that you do have those consistencies over time, your processes that work for you. And that just helps your efficiency, your profitability, predictability, season over season as you grow. Keep learning all the time. I love hanging out at webinars, going to meetings. There's always new stuff going on there, no matter how long you've been in the game. And reach out for help. Networking is huge in this industry. What have you seen with trees? What have they? It's a great way. And, the more healthy trees, the better for mental health, the better for the environment, the better for the industry, everything all around. So with that, I thank you. Here's my contact info. And also, we can go back to that. You can also get a hold of me through just Kevin Brewer at arborjet.com. But one of the complimentary things we have from going through this is a pocket guide that details common insect disease and treatments for top 30 issues. You can just scan this QR code right on the screen and go fill that out, or you can visit go.arborjet.com and then /tree stuff webinar pocket guide, which I'll also copy into the chat that you can take right out of there. And with that, we can help kind of go through any questions we may have if you have some.
All right. Thank you very much for all of that. I think that's a great, great resource. I do want to put one thing in there. If you do want to get a hold of Kevin, you can also just email phc@treestuff.com. The Arborjet group, they are absolutely fantastic about answering any questions that people have about the products, and you can get it straight from the horse's mouth on how to use all of this stuff. So I do have a couple questions here, especially since you went over a whole bunch. So let's see some stuff that's good here. Talking about new planting of trees, we talked about NutriRoot, we talked about plant growth regulators. How do you decide which one to use on a new tree, and is there a time limit there, or of how soon you can use NutriRoot or a PGR on it?
I like to use NutriRoot at the time of installation. So yeah, you don't want to wait on that. You can either incorporate the granular into the backfill, or you can water it in with the liquid. But you want to get those root growth hormones in there and that water management product in right away. On plant growth regulators, I wouldn't put those on a newly installed plant right out of the gate. But if I were going to do a bare root transplant and I knew I had a season or two beforehand, I would apply a PGR to a tree before transplanting, do some root pruning, get that tree a little hardier, a little denser in the root zone,
Mm-hmm.
and move that. PGRs I would use on trees after they're established or established trees after root damage, but probably not newly planted trees.
That
But the
makes
neutral
sense.
root, definitely go after it right away. And then you can reapply that as often as monthly for very high end customers or just spring and fall.
Okay. Um, how does NutriRoot work for trees that have been damaged? Uh, so, for instance, you have a pin oak that was struck by lightning. Um, is that something that's recommended?
Anytime you can have a tree get a healthier growing environment, it's going to help. Lightning strikes can be difficult to predict how far that decline is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, anything that helps make water and nutrients available will help trees that have been damaged.
Okay. Um, and what does NutriRoot work for? Are there particular trees? Is there um, does it work for pretty much everything? Does it work for shrubs?
Yep, it's a great soil health product. I mean, for shrubs, if you want more flowering, we have a product called Bloomplex, which I didn't go into, which is designed specifically for flowering plants. But I like it on specifically on new installations and mature trees, where growth is not necessarily what you're going for. When you don't want them to waste a bunch of energy trying to grow, or you want them to establish, that's a great time for NutriRoot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you have established trees that are growing vigorously and you're trying to get that landscape a little more lush, that's where Arborplex might be a good idea. But being able to mix the two, I use NutriRoot as the go-to on my property. I use it twice a year on everything. It really is a great combination product. There's not really any plants it's not good for.
Okay. Is there any risk when you're using NutriRoot um, of maybe burning out the soil, sort of like a fertilizer would, if you use it too much?
There's not. That's the great benefit of it. That's why I also like that it's a 2-2-3. So that nitrogen is only 2% of the product, and it is usually the urea nitrogen that causes burning. So you don't have to worry about any heat situations or any burning on the application.
Okay. Um, and then with the growth regulators, if you're using paclobutrazol on something, it's increasing the hair root growth. Is it also decreasing the growth of main roots?
It does decrease diameter growth a little bit. Yeah. So it's going to increase root hair growth. Um, it'll slow down diameter growth on some of the larger parts of the tree.
Okay, great. And you mentioned um, uh, predator bugs, predatory bugs, instead of using pesticides. If that were your recommendation to a homeowner, say, to get some green lacewings and set them out in their garden or their woods or where have you, how do you charge for that?
So that would go down to whatever your hourly rate is that you want to charge. So you charge for the pests, but you want to do your research, find out how much they cost, charge them for the pests, but then it's just the hourly rate. That's when you're monitoring. So you might have to charge $50 to deal with the shipping, ordering, and delivering of the pest, but then going back monthly to see that it's establishing, whether you need to introduce more, charging that $250 an hour to be on the property to monitor. So when you're going with an organic, natural, very natural approach to plant healthcare, it's charging as the consultant, as the monitorer, as the viewer of the property. So you're going more towards how often you're going to be there to check up to make sure they're doing their job. So I would say you'd want to come back, if it's a large property, you might want to charge, you might want to spend 2 hours there twice a month charging your hourly fee.
Mm-hmm. All right, and I think the last one we're going to do is from Luke Norvell. He wants to hear if you have any input on SAPW and the severity of the issue in San Diego.
SAPW.
Which I believe is
South
South
American
American palm weevil. Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with that pest as I'm from the East Coast. We have Wister Dorta out of California. He's very familiar with that. It is a treatable issue. Definitely, I believe it's the injections of imidacloprid that are working well for that. But it's spreading around. But I would, you can reach out to me and I can get you in touch with Wister, and he'd be able to answer that in much more detail.
So, great. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I think we're going to call it there. The link to the quiz is in the comments. It's pinned on both Facebook and YouTube. You just have to take that and get 16 out of 20 to get 2 CEUs, unless you are watching this in the future, in which case it is still worth 1 CEU. Um, you have to give us some time in order to uh, get all the information to the ISA. We are the largest supplier of CEUs to anyone or to people in the world. So it takes a little while because we give so many to the ISA that they have to get through all of them. So give us a little bit of time there. And uh, uh, yeah, so thank you very much once again. Please use Kevin as a resource. Get your complimentary pocket guide. Contact him at his Kevin at Arborjet.com or at PHC at treestuff.com. So, uh, Kevin, do you have anything to send us off on?
Well, that's it. Thank you. It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
Great. All right. Have a nice night, everybody.